Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Innovating for Good Google Hangout. I'm Corinne Gray, and I work as an Innovation Engagement Officer for UNHCR Innovation. It's definitely been a while since I've moderated one of these, so it's great to see everyone again. If you're just joining us for the first time, Innovating for Good is a monthly Google Hangout series that we started together with Plus Social Good. And the whole idea behind this series is that we want to spark conversations on innovation as that applies to humanitarians. So each month we broadcast different topics on Innovating for Good, and each Hangout has its own theme. During our second Hangout for 2016, we were very excited to welcome some amazing panelists. We had some friends from ThoughtWorks and UN OCHA, and we talked about how the SDGs can influence humanitarian innovation. Today, we're actually going to be talking about how low-tech communication solutions in emergencies help save lives, how they can build resilient communities, and how they can enable effective communications in emergencies. Before we jump into the conversation, though, I just wanted to do a couple housekeeping. And we want this to very much be a conversation. So for those of you who are looking at us, you can join in the conversation via Twitter by using the hashtag #Innov4Good. And we're tweeting that right now from at UNHCR Innovation and at +_social good. But if you do want to send a question to our panelists today and you want to join in the conversation, be sure to send a tweet using that hashtag, and we'll be sure to look out for your tweet. So with us, I'm really excited to have Caroline, Angela, and Fitria. Caroline has spent most of her life in France and the United States, and she actually has a degree in political science from the Lyon Institut d'études politiques, and she has a diploma in international relations from Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Caroline joined Fondation Hirondelle in December of 2003, and she's actually taken on the responsibility in the Radio Okapi project for finance and administration, and she did that at a time when the project was growing and preparing to cover the 2006 national elections. She became project manager for Okapi in 2007, and then in 2008 she joined the executive team at Fondation Hirondelle as Chief Operations Officer. Since then, she's introduced a coherent project management cycle. She's organized and led many strategic meetings with donors and partners, managed more than 15 Lausanne staff, and in the field directly. Also joining us is Fitria from PetaJakarta. Fitria works as a media coordinator for PetaJakarta. She's responsible for overseeing the public image of the project and providing social media analysis, as well as managing flood reports from Jakarta's citizens. She's interested in how digital media technologies influence cities and urban culture. PetaJakarta is an open source, community-led real-time map that collects and disseminates information about flooding and critical water infrastructure in Jakarta. The applied research project is led by the Smart Infrastructure Facility in collaboration with BPBD DKI Jakarta and Twitter. PetaJakarta.org harnesses the power of social media to gather, sort, and display information about flooding for Jakarta residents in real time. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Angela, who is a technologist, community builder, and an open source software advocate. She creates and manages platforms for diverse global communities, and she's very passionate about building and using appropriate technology tools to create impact in lives of marginalized groups. And I'm going to give each of our panelists a chance to talk a little bit about what their organizations do. But first, Angela, starting off with you, you work at Ushahidi, and I know that Ushahidi has long built and connected communities through technology. Can you tell us a little bit about Ushahidi's story, and in your experience, where do you find the gaps in high tech, and where do you see that low tech solutions can be the best way forward?
Sure thing. So just for a very brief historical context into how Ushahidi even started in the beginning is back in 2007, 2008, there was a lot of political unrest as a result of elections in Kenya. And, there were pockets of violence breaking out in different parts of the country. The mainstream media wasn't really able to report exactly what was happening on the ground, and the government was also trying to heavily downplay how severe the situation was. So what the founders of Ushahidi did was set up a web platform that would allow for ordinary citizens to send in messages via email, SMS, and the web platform, and have that aggregated and visualized on a map. Essentially giving them a voice when no one else could or would. And I think one of the philosophies that we've capitalized on that's really helped us as we've moved along is the fact that we were targeting the default device, which is the mobile phone, right? You know, during times of crisis, the first thing you'll reach out for is your mobile phone. That's the first thing you reach out for, to send someone a text message, find out how they're doing. And we saw that as a really good way of making sure that everybody had an opportunity to actually engage and share their opinions and share messages around what exactly was happening to them. So I think what our tool actually does is fill in that gap of, you know, being able to engage with groups that would traditionally be considered passive recipients of information, because we've seen even from research that has been conducted in the past that mobile penetration statistics in Africa are actually greatly increasing. You know, there's a high probability of you finding my grandmother with a mobile phone as opposed to finding her with a laptop. So being able to target or make use of the mobile phone has been really helpful in helping us reach those groups.
Thanks, Angela. And Fitria, your organization collaborates with city municipalities. You use both social media to source vital information on flooding, but at the same time, verification of public data is done by human beings, checking physical water level marks on the floodgates. Can you tell us a bit about what this process looks like, and why low-tech solutions, or just solutions that are entirely based on physical human presence verifying data, can in fact be effective?
Yeah, thank you. So I think I'm going to give a little bit information about PetaJakarta first. So as it has been said before, so PetaJakarta.org is an open source real-time flood map that displays information about flood and critical water infrastructure in Jakarta. So on our map, there are two kinds of sources that contribute information on this map. First is citizens for their reports on flood, and the second is the Jakarta Emergency Service for flood height and water level information. So what we do is we ask people on Twitter to tell us their situation. So we listen to a specific keyword, which is banjir, means flood, and send an automatic message to everyone in Twitterland who mentions one of those keywords, asking whether they're facing flood or not. So if yes, please tweet us what's happening. And this information is then displayed on a publicly available map that can be seen by other people and government agencies who can transparently monitor and cross-check the info that is being shared. So we also received flood height and water level information from the Jakarta Emergency Service. So for the flood height, the emergency service relies on the information from government officials and neighborhood unit and village through text, WhatsApp, and or radio, as well as citizen reports via social media. And then they will input that information on a dashboard and then automatically update on our map. And then for the water level, there will be officers who manually check the river gauge on the floodgates and update the Jakarta Emergency Service operators via call or text or radio every 1 hour, but it gets more frequent during heavy rain. So this whole information is also displayed on the map in real time. And then for your question about why the solution based on physical human presence, verifying data useful, effective, I think it's because we believe that humans are the best sensors. Sometimes, for example, publicly available satellite imagery for a location isn't always available in a timely manner, but humans are always there unless we're extinct, of course. But we with our knowledge can identify and describe a situation and aid that is needed. And with our cell phone, we can share that information. So in Jakarta case, for example, this city is affected by annual heavy rainfall that causes flooding. And the water infrastructure is still developing, and there's no level sensors at the floodgates that can automatically update themselves if there's a change in the water level. So checking and monitoring are all done by humans. And also, in addition, Jakarta has also has a power that maybe other cities may not have, such as the social media power that is potential for crowdsourcing information. So people here complain about a lot of things on their social media, and when there's flooding, they also turn to social media, not only to complain, but also to share information. So here we can see that people are already connected through social media networks. They can easily cross-check the information in no time, and then in the event of disaster, information becomes valuable. And to have more information that can be accessed publicly will help not only the residents but also emergency service to make a better decision about their exposure to flood risk.
Thanks, Fitria. And so we've looked at sort of that combination of physical human presence. We've looked at social media. Caroline, your organization works with independent radio and emergencies. So can you tell us a little bit about your work and why radio is such a powerful communications tool to reach affected populations?
Sure, thank you. Indeed, Fondation Hirondelle was created more than 20 years ago by radio journalists from Switzerland, and their idea was to provide reliable and trusted information to population in time of crisis, and it was in the context of the Rwandan genocide. People had followed what misinformation and propaganda could do with Radio Mille Collines and the rumors in Kigali at the time. But few people had thought at that period that reliable, independent, fact-checked information could play a role and bring the tools needed for people to go on with their lives and rebuild their lives. So that's really the mission of Fondation Hirondelle, and we have worked in Kosovo and Nepal, Timor, throughout the years. We now work in Central African Republic or Mali, for instance, and the combination human beings, and I totally agree with Fitria, it's at the heart of what we are doing, in our case working with journalists. The combination of human beings and different types of technologies is what we try to do for every situation, to produce the information and make it reachable and accessible to the greatest part of the population. And radio could be shortwave, FM, middle waves, has proven to be the most effective media in crisis zones, in times of emergencies, in countries where the infrastructure is low. It's effective because it's less costly than TV or printed press. And I think it's oral, so everybody can listen. You don't need to know how to read to access the information. And on the receiving side, we all know that a short FM receiver is something that people can take on with them in their homes, in the fields, if they have to flee and be displaced. Batteries are relatively cheap, and it's really a tool that the same way the cell phones are today in every families, in many homes you find a radio receiver. And I also want to share some experience we've had in accessing information through radio versus through a cell phone. A radio receiver is anonymous. You have your receiver, you turn it on and off, and if you need to be confidential when you listen to radio, there is no trace. This is different with a cell phone, and I'm talking about radio through the internet with a smartphone. Because to access information through your smartphone, first you need a contract or an agreement with a cell phone company, and that cell phone company will have your information. And in many countries, we know government put pressure. It's been the case in DRC, in Tunisia, in other places. These governments put pressure on the listing of who has a smartphone and who has access to the internet. So in very closed societies, this could become an issue. And of course, we all know, unfortunately, with the NSA and WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden revelations, that we are all, through our web print and web presence, somewhere, somehow, on lists and not anonymous anymore.
That's an excellent point, Caroline. And one of the things that really had me excited about this Hangout is that, working at UNHCR Innovation, I think just the term innovation right now in the humanitarian sector really has people's minds set on high technology, something new, out of the box, invention basically. And I think when it comes to looking at a lot of our projects, a lot of times people might say, but that's not really all that innovative. And I think one of the things that we always try to stress a lot is that it really doesn't have anything to do with the technology or how fast or how new the technology is. What we're really looking at is what is a process basically that's going to help you find the most appropriate technology. So it's really exciting to be talking with you guys today about low-tech communication solutions. But I wanted to, before we even get deeper into that, I just wanted to ask you, Caroline, for those of us who are watching who might be completely new to terms like low-tech and communications and emergencies, how do you define low-tech communication solutions in emergency? What do you define as low-tech? And what do you find? I mean, I know you're working a lot with radio, but what do you find are some of the more efficient ways to reach populations in needs? Or walk us through what your process looks like in terms of determining what's the best technology solution.
I didn't hear the end of the question, but I don't think we should be exclusive, saying, we work only with low-tech or high-tech. What is important is the end result, and for us, it's to reach an audience, mainly through radio, but in some situations, it can be on other media like the television or indeed the internet. And it's, for us, more and more, it's a combination. It's a combination of very simple technology, using telephones, of course, to contact sources of information, to verify information. But it's also physically having people in a studio within a radio and be around the same table. So that's what I call a social media, physically being around the same table and having a debate and a conversation versus talking through screens. But then we need very high level technology like satellites connections, because the signal from the studio needs to be sent to a satellite to be distributed to as many FM transmitters or community radios that partner with us to rebroadcast these programs. So it's an alliance between very simple technology, giving to correspondents in rural areas a cell phone, a basic computer, a solar system to charge their equipment and collect information, treat it, and send it to the main studio, and then high technology to broadcast the information.
Thanks, Caroline. That makes a lot of sense. Angela, what about at Ushahidi? How do you define low-tech communication solutions, and how do you even go about picking some of those solutions?
So I think my answer is very closely related to Caroline's, in the sense that for us as well, it's an alliance of a variety of different tools. I think for us, the main goal at the end of the day is really making sure that the technology meets our audience where they are, making sure that the audience is at the heart of it, right? You know, if you're looking at people in places where they have no access to electricity, maybe it's looking at radio or looking at mobile phones. But if you're targeting people within the, the city centers and places like that, it's, online dashboards or, the website or smartphone applications. But I think the key there really is the context and the audience. That really is the key to determining, what the best way of reaching populations in needs would be. Right, so it's a combination of who the audience is, the context, and the situation in that particular case.
Thanks, Angela. I think that as we've all seen, innovating on low-tech solutions, it is a user-oriented and it is a participatory process. What I've heard from each of you is that it's really important to understand your audience. Fitria, do you have a sense of how the humanitarian field can better identify some of these end user challenges? And what about enabling those communities to co-create those solutions? Hi, Fitria, are you with us?
Yeah, sorry. So I think how to better, I think by recognizing what the community needs. So I think by talking to them, and also, some in Jakarta, like for flooding, when at the time of flooding, people in the vulnerable area, they have developed their own system of resilience. So I think that's what people need to look at. So there are also many new technologies that is developing, but those technologies are serve similar functions, but they don't collaborate to each other. So sometimes this abundance of technology cannot reach these vulnerable people.
Thanks, Fitria. Actually, we have a Twitter user who just sent a question. G_innovates asks, as easy or as speedy as it is to implement an ICT-enabled innovation, his question is, do they really promote equality? And his point is that exclusion should be a real concern. So to follow up on what you just ended on, Fitria, how do you mitigate some of the risks of excluding some parts of the most vulnerable populations?
I think sometimes, I don't know what, like excluding people from the technology, but I think we also can work that out. For instance, like last year when we deploy this map, some residents in the vulnerable area, they don't have cell phones to report about their condition there, about what they need there. But we do receive some information from the organized communities telling us that, hey, I just got a text from people in this area and they need this information and they need this help and evacuation, and then this is the flooding condition there. So at the time like that, I think we still can find a way to help each other without excluding certain people, you know.
Thanks, Fitria.
If I may, I think the issue of exclusion is really important, and we go back to in which context the service is delivered. I'm glad to hear that in Jakarta, people who don't have access are helped or put on the screen by people who have access. But if you think of a context where you have a war or an ongoing very tense situation, unfortunately, the emergency will be used to intensify these divisions and maybe have one group against the other and one group making sure that the other group doesn't have access to the relief or the aid. And coming into this discussion with the eyes of journalists, you know, and professional people in the business of information, what is important and what I would like to say is, of course, you need the technology, you need the channels, you need the media, but you also need the trust, and you need information that people will rely on and really trust at times and in the most difficult period of their life, and that trust is possible if indeed you don't exclude anybody, if indeed you are comprehensive in who you are talking to, in what language you're talking to, if you're using as many languages as possible for everybody to understand. And this is what we try to do, and it's difficult, of course, but we have found ourselves in situations where we saw humanitarian actors not consciously and not voluntarily, but because of first of all, the language they were using, or where they had located their camps or their hospital or facilities, they were indeed excluding part of the victims.
I think just to add a bit on that, so one of the things that we like to say at Ushahidi is that technology contributes to about 10% of the success of what you're doing, and then the other 90% is really, you know, the human side of things. And, you know, I've had Caroline talk about, you know, language barrier, making sure that we are opening up the doors for people to communicate in the way that they're able to, and two, building trust. Now, in our experience at Ushahidi, and even looking at some of the different deployments that have been set out there, what we've seen work out really well is also partnerships, right? So, for example, for us during our, you know, our election project, for us to be able to kind of establish that trust with groups that we ideally haven't connected with before, we've worked with different social enterprises or community-based organizations that already have that trust level built with them, and making sure that in the event that they're not actually able to interact with the technology, then we have these people who they have established a trust level with actually be a good enabler of being able to send that forward.
Thanks, Angela. I just want to shift it a little bit, Angela. If we could continue with you, how do you reconcile the various scales of connectivity issues with different types of emergencies? So, for example, in a protracted emergency where connectivity might be bad, and then in a rapid onset emergency where connectivity might just be completely absent.
That's a fairly tricky one. So I mean, when you look at rapid onset emergencies where technology is lost, it does end up being a little difficult trying to figure out what the best way to reach out would be. But in my experience, what I've seen work out really well is, going back to things like SMS or, returning to radio. But then again, circling back to the comments that we'd made earlier, I think the key there is making sure that you understand fully the context of what's going on, whether it's the environmental or external factors, while also keeping in mind who the audience is. Because one of the things we also need to remember is the fact that, technology can only take us so far. What happens in the case where, radio connection is completely down and all SMS channels are down as well. You really are stuck in a bind, and in that case, you have to employ other different kind of tactics, whether it's actually going out there physically and engaging with these people.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Angela. So I wanted to ask a little bit about what do you see as some of the possible scenarios, and this is for you, Caroline, but for each of our panelists as well, if you want to jump in. What are some of the possible scenarios where low-tech solutions can be used to build up the resilience of vulnerable communities?
Well, the ideal scenario is where you can use any kind of technology to prevent the crisis. And in protracted crisis, unfortunately, the emergency, the suffering, the problems are recurring, and it means that people know that it's going to come back. If it's poverty or bad governance or war, it's not an election. I'm thinking right now of Central African Republic that will solve all of these problems. So how do you, after that election they are going through right now, make sure that you engage with the population so that they can first talk and kind of liberate themselves with everything they went through in terms of trauma and violence and suffering, and develop solutions in their homes, in their communities, in their village, and don't expect everything from the state, because it's going to take decades to rebuild the state. So the scenario is when you can prevent and again build the trust, build the connections, build the relationship with the people through interactive program, through what we try to do, for instance, is joint listenership sessions, in villages or in quartier, in the capitals, have people gather together to listen to a program and talk about it very simply. But because they will express their point of views, because they will have heard new ideas or testimonies or solutions, then they can talk about it and themselves find what suits them and helps them move on.
Thank you, Caroline. Angela, do you or Fitria want to jump in on that? Okay, so Fitria, I wanted to move into asking a little bit about citizen reporting. You said that in Jakarta, many people have access to smartphones. How did you go about developing your system of citizen reporting?
Yeah, so we want to find a way on how information from residents can be useful, both for the residents themselves and the government in making a better decision during flooding. So we don't want to use new technologies for the residents because it takes time to adjust to the new technologies. So we're using the existing one, like social media. many people here, they're already familiar and using social media like Twitter. So, and this year we integrate Clue, which is an application, which is a government-sponsored citizen reporting app, and Pasang Mata, a citizen journalism app created by an online news agency. So all of these applications, they're already there, and that's how we want to develop this citizen reporting from this application, because people are already using these applications to report about their condition and about flooding. So what we do, as I said before, we just we ask them we ask them on Twitter, like, if you have if you are facing a flood situation, please tweet us the information with your geolocation so it can be mapped on our maps. So, and for the Clue and Pasang Mata, they all have flood category in their application, so we can already see the flood reports on our map once people start to report.
Thanks, Fitria. So I actually have a question from a Twitter user, Prashanthi, and she wants to know how easy or how difficult is it to ensure the quality and the veracity of crowdsourced data in emergencies.
Yeah, sure. So we deal a lot of about that because we crowdsource information. So about the verifications, that's why we involve also Jakarta Emergency Service in all this reporting. So actually on the apps on the social media apps that we use, there's a certain verification system in them. So Twitter, we send them an automatic message saying that are you facing a flood situation? While Clue, they have their, and Pasang Mata, they have their own operators that filter out the flood reports. So, and also now on our map, the Twitter reports who got retweeted by the Jakarta Emergency Service, it means that these reports are already verified with the Jakarta Emergency Service. So that's how the verification system that we use.
So I think even for us at Ushahidi, verification has always been that question that always comes up. Because, you know, when you're opening it up to having anyone sharing information, there's always a risk of bias. But you also have a responsibility to make sure that you're not putting something out there that will either create a worse situation. And some of the verification mechanisms that we've seen have been very similar to what Fitria was actually talking about, where it's a mix of, you know, you have physical responders on the ground who are able to correlate or corroborate the information that's being shared at that particular time, or, you know, having a look at some verified accounts on Twitter and seeing, you know, this information coming from this source, this being a trusted source, does seem like something that we should be following up on.
If I may, this is you know, it's very close to, again, what journalism is about. And 20 years ago, you didn't have Twitter, you didn't have apps to verify information or have people give you information. But what happened then, and this is what happens in some of the countries where we work still today, because people don't have the internet but they have a telephone, is that women and men call. They call happening, and a journalist doesn't just take that information for granted. He or she calls sources to verify. She or he crosses the information, and if it's something that is factual, then it's published. So the issue with the larger scale data or crowdfunding, when you have hundreds of thousands of millions of people, of course, is to verify. But I think it's important to make sure that all initiatives have and feel the responsibility, like Angela and Fitria do, to verify the information. Because this is where otherwise you open the door to doing wrong when you're trying to help.
Thanks, Caroline. So we actually have a follow-up question from Prashanthi, and I think it's a great one. And the question is, given that high-tech solutions are more popular, are there any challenges that you're finding in your organizations? And this is for each of our panelists. Are you finding any challenges in financing and investing in low-tech solutions? Do you find that it's easier to attract partners for high-tech solutions versus low-tech solutions?
If I may, I'll start. In terms of finding partners, donors, investors, it is very difficult today to attract partners when you talk about radio, unfortunately. It's wrongly perceived as old technology. It's not sexy. It's not exciting, especially for Western donors. I'm thinking of the West Coast of the United States, or some of these new technology gurus, and they, for me, in some ways, they are disconnected to the reality of millions of people in the world, unfortunately.
If I may also add, I think I can relate a bit with what Caroline is saying, but I think in our experience as Ushahidi, what's really helped is people having seen the kind of impact that our tools have actually had out there, so that the focus is really on the solution for the audience and for the context and for the situation at hand. But I do recognize that definitely is a challenge. Most of the time you'll speak to a funder or a donor and they want this very sexy dashboard, as opposed to you thinking about different ways of engaging with someone, whether it's via USSD. But then it's really just been, I think one of the things that has helped us out is the fact that we kind of balance that out, circling back to what we talked about earlier about it being an alliance of both the low tech and the high tech, making sure that we're meeting everybody's needs, identifying who the different audiences are. For somebody who's a project manager, they'll want a little more insight into what this data actually means, which means you're going to have to build a sexy dashboard. But for the person on the ground who doesn't have access to that dashboard, they just want a way of being able to easily pull out the information and see that on SMS. So we've tried to balance it out, but I can definitely relate to what Caroline's saying.
What about you, Fitria? Anything to add to that experience?
In financing, actually, like Angela said, that actually people who want to finance this all technology, they have to just focus on what this either way, like even though it's a low tech or high tech, but I think all of us here we're using the hybrid one. Like we combine low tech and high tech to meet our targets. So people who want to finance that should just focus on what's the results of this hybrid technology, not focus on how low tech the low tech is or how high tech the high tech is.
Thanks, Fitria. So we're actually coming to the end of our time, but we did have one more question from Twitter that I'd like to throw out to each of our panelists. And that question is, what are the paradoxical effects and/or the unexpected consequences of using mobile technology for good? Should I read that one again?
Yeah,
so
please.
So this Twitter user G_innovates wants to know, what are the paradoxical effects, or what are some of the unexpected consequences of using mobile technology for good? So I guess have you in your experience seen consequences that you did not think would happen?
I think in my experience, because like here also the mobile penetration is increasing, people using social media, and I think the consequences is there are just so much data that you get on by in when you ask people about what's your condition. So I think the challenge is how to deal with this data and to make sense of this data so you can have a very good conclusion of the condition.
Our experience, it's again a very different context. It's more the African context. What we have found as a bad surprise, asking people, for instance, to call during the programs. You think it's democratic and it's opening the voices to as many people as possible, but you limit actually yourself to a fringe of the population that, first of all, has the financial means to call, because in many of the countries where we work, indeed, people have a cell phone, but they are on prepaid and scratch cards systems, so very often they are called or they receive credit for emergency calls, but if they want to call the radio to participate to a program, that's not in their budget. So you limit yourself, and so you get the people who have the means that call you, and also the people who have the confidence. It's not everybody who feels educated and confident and with a phone willing to get on air. So for me, that's the paradox of, again, there is the tool and there is the people using these tools.
I think for us, in our experience of some of the deployments we've been actively involved in, it probably would be, the kind of information that's actually being shared via these channels, like via SMS and things like that, which does bring up a lot of questions around privacy, right? Because somebody will be very open and very willing to share extremely personal identifying information without quite thinking about what the long-term effects will be. And so those are some of the things we've also had to think about in terms of how we deal with the data that we're collecting and how we publish it.
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, Caroline, did you want to add to that?
No, I think it's a very valid point, and actually everywhere on Earth.
No, absolutely, and I think that later in the year we probably should have a hangout just on data privacy, because those are some issues that we have to think through as well. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time for today's hangout, but I did want to thank each of you. Caroline Vuillemin, am I saying your last name correctly? And Angela.
Yes, kind of.
And because I realized I did not say your full names at the end, but thanks to Caroline Vuillemin, to Angela Lungati, and to Fitria Sudirman for joining us today. You have been great. I wanted to thank all of our viewers as well, and our Twitter users who've been engaging with us on social media. Like I said, the whole point of having these conversations is for us to start a dialogue with some of our counterparts who might be dealing with some of the very same issues that we are. If any of you have any more thoughts on this discussion, we definitely encourage you to keep the conversation going on Twitter using our hashtag #InnoForGood. We're actually going to make the Hangout available online on YouTube, on both the Plus Social Good and UNHCR Innovation YouTube channels in the next day. So thank you again for watching, and we will see you for next month's episode of Innovating for Good. I'm Corinne Gray, and thank you for watching.